Ready to get cracking here?
Yeah.
All right, thank you for your patience. So we are here to talk about the new contract that went effective as of January 3rd. We've had a few of these meetings so far leading up to January 1st or January 3rd. And we've got a little, now that the forms are actually out and available for use, we realize there's some cool things about DocuSign that I'm going to get to at the tail end of this meeting so that you guys will see that and be aware of that. So I'm just going to dive in. Is there anybody that has any questions about the contract initially now that you've seen it? Has anybody used it yet?
Yes, sir.
Penny has? Might be using it currently. What do you think, Penny? Is it good?
Yeah.
Okay.
I love it.
Just a few little changes, but we want to make sure
Yep.
we're not missing anything.
Right. Yep. Very good. So I'm recording this also, and I'm going to put this out. And so we've had some classes where we've gone through and just said, hey, here's the changes compared with the last contract. In this class, I'm going to go through kind of from start to finish so that new agents will understand and know the whole contract, not just the changes, because if you didn't know the old contract, you're not going to know why those changes matter anyway, right? So, all right, so start off with, we jump in, and up here at the top of the screen here, it says buyer and seller is licensed under the laws of South Carolina as a real estate licensee. That obviously, if the buyer or seller is licensed, we've got to check those boxes. There's, without exception, without fail. In fact, if the buyer or seller is part of an LLC that's buying or selling, that should be checked. Really and truly, if a spouse is buying or selling, that should be checked. If that person has an interest in that deal, that box should be checked. Then we go down to the next things at the top of the page that are required to be as part of a contract at the top of the pages in South Carolina as of a few years back. And that is the buyer and the seller either acknowledge that the person that we're working with is either a client or a customer. And so hopefully we all know the difference between client and customer service. Generally speaking, if we're working with them, they're going to be a client. And another thing that I want to make sure and make clear of, we talked about this in previous classes, but we want to make sure that we are checking and filling out every blank in the contract that is fill-outable, if that's a word. We don't leave anything blank. And so it's a common thing that we see a lot, that we get an offer and it says buyer is a client or a customer, and it says seller is blank. That's not the proper way to fill it out. We want to have that filled out when we send the offer, because when we send the offer, we want to make sure that that person who's receiving the offer can just sign an initial and have that contract be done. So we can assume with reasonable certainty that if we are making an offer on a house that's listed on the market, that seller is a client. And so we can go ahead and check that client box. Obviously, we're not going to have our client's initial because the seller's initial, but we can go ahead and check the box. Otherwise, if we don't check the box and send it out, that's technically a change to the contract that they would have to check an initial when they send it back. And so we have to be initialing that change. So we want to send a full and complete offer over so that the other side can just ratify. And that's one that we see that a lot of times is left blank, and it shouldn't be. All right, so terms of the offer. This is where we write on that first blank the date, or it'll be there for DocuSign. We put in the date that the contract of sale is entered into on blank date between buyer and seller. And this is where we want to put obviously the buyer's full name and the seller's full name. If there's an LLC or a trust involved, we want to put those names and have those documents available. Make sure that we've checked that the people that we're working with are the actual people who have permission to sign officially and technically for that LLC or trust or whatever it is. And that's pretty self-explanatory there. We want to make sure the people we're working with are the people who are signing the documents.
Sometimes if we're with them, like if you're at the table writing your contract with your buyers, ask for their driver's license. That way you can copy it, you'll have full legal name, and you'll have their birthday to put in command.
Yep. That's a great thought. Penny, for those on the recording, Penny said that she will ask people for their driver's license when she's writing a contract, and that way you know you've got their full and correct name. The only thing I would say about that is if you're going to do it for one person, you've got to do it for everyone. So if you ask for a driver's license for one client, you've got to ask for a driver's license for all your clients. Otherwise, there's a very easy discrimination case there if you don't ask for a driver's license for everyone. that could be age discrimination, it could be anything, because birthdays are on that, other information on that, so that could be any kind of discrimination. All right, so one change, significant change to the contract. Generally speaking, let me take a step back here too. Generally speaking, the way the contract was changed was there were, we divided the contract into logical sections. It didn't used to have sections, it used to just have paragraphs, 1, 2, 3, 4, all down the road. And it still has those paragraphs, but those paragraphs are divided into sections. And so you can see those that you have contracts in front of you. And I recommend if you're watching the recording, go ahead and get a contract in front of you. Pause the recording, pause the video now, go ahead and get a contract in front of you so you can follow along with us. But you can see on the first one, it says terms of offer. So terms of the offer is section 1. And that really, we brought all of the things that are pertinent to the actual terms of the offer into that section 1. Section 2 is transaction costs and financing. And so anything that goes along with that, the closing cost and financing as a part of the deal, go there. Section 3, which starts on page 4, the bottom of page 4, is due diligence, inspections, and repairs. So that's section 3. So anything around the due diligence period and inspection reports and things like that, that goes in that section 3. And then on the bottom of page 6, there is section 4. The sections are Roman numerals, are what define those. And so that's disclosures. So any disclosures that we would have, like property disclosure, lead-based paint disclosure, things like that, those are defined there in section 4, along with any HOA things or flood zone issues or anything like that. Section 5 is really anything additional that needs to be attached to the contract. So that's where our sale and closing contingencies are, and additional addenda, things like that. And then paragraph 6, or section 6, I should say, is other legal terms. So that's where I get to and say that's the legal mumbo jumbo. So there's 6 sections of the contract that it's been divided into, and we feel like it's been a much more logical and clear path to go through the contract that way. Where in the past, and I didn't also say I'm the chairman of the contract committee. And so I have a lot of involvement in making this what it is. And in the past, we've made small revisions. It was always add a paragraph here, add a paragraph there, add a paragraph here, add a paragraph there. And we stepped back and looked at it when we were doing it this time and said, this thing has gotten to where it's all kind of jumbled up. Like we're writing a whole contract, and at the end, it's doing definitions of things. When in reality, we should put those definitions at the front because we're talking about them through the whole contract, and we haven't defined what we're even talking about yet. And so that's why you see some of these changes. So a big change that we've made is after the terms of offer, immediately after the terms of the offer where the buyer and seller names are, definitions come in there, where this used to be at the end of the contract. Not much has changed about these definitions. So a single business day is defined as a 24-hour period beginning at 8 a.m. of any weekday, Monday through Friday. That doesn't include Saturdays, Sundays, or holidays. And so that's for some reason, that's always a sticking point. People all the time will send you an email and say, hey, due diligence is almost up, it's almost 5 o'clock. Is that right? Is there ever a time that due diligence would end at 5 o'clock on this contract?
7:59 a.m.
Right. So a business day is from 8 a.m. to 8 a.m. And so, and that's it starts on the next day after ratification if it didn't ratify before 8 o'clock. So if you ratified it right now at 10:18 in the morning, our due diligence period would start tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. and it goes for 10 business days. And so where we are right now, you've got Martin Luther King holiday coming up on Monday, so that day doesn't count, so you'd skip that day. So they really have 11, weekdays as part of their due diligence period. So always ends on 7:59 of that last day. Contract acceptance. This is another thing that we did tweak the language in here for contract acceptance a little bit, just so people understood. Contract acceptance occurs at the date and time when the party that has placed the final signatures and things on the contract sends it over to the other side. So essentially, like, hey, we've agreed on everything. My client has signed everything. We're done. Sends it over to the other side, and that other side acknowledges it, sends it back, right? So contract acceptance, though, occurs when the delivery happens, right? So if you send me something, if Penny and I were in a deal together, with our clients. Penny sends me a contract. You know, I send her an offer, right? Her clients say, you know, we're gonna counter back with this, we're gonna counter back with that. They make some changes, initial everything, send it back to us. My clients say, okay, we're good with that. They initial off on the changes. I send it back to Penny. We are under contract
That
because
timestamp when you hit send.
right when I send,
ratification.
we are ratified and under contract because I have delivered a copy with no more changes, with everything agreed upon and no more changes to the other side.
The ratified copy.
The signed copy.
Yeah.
So it's been delivered, right?
Yeah.
And then-
What he's saying, that ratification is that email sent receipt when it's sent. It doesn't have to be
Not
signed
when
on
they
that.
Right.
You know how
Yeah.
everybody signs and dates that bottom?
Right.
Because I could get it today and sign and date it tomorrow and think I've got an extra
Right.
day in due
That's
diligence,
right.
but I don't.
That's exactly right.
Once it's
So-
fully executed.
It's fully executed.
When both sides have signed, it's gonna be done.
Yep. That's right.
Once
So
you have a meeting
so-
of the minds, you have an executed
Yep.
contract.
exactly. So when the meeting of the minds has happened, we've delivered the contract. It's under contract. So we get a lot of questions, and so the next thing that's supposed to happen for those new agents that don't understand how it works. So I send it to Penny. Penny gets it at, let's say, 10:21 a.m. today. She goes to the bottom of the last page and fills that last page out and says, you know, final contract acceptance noted by Penny Broach with Keller Palmetto at 10:21 on January 11th, and sends it back to me. If I send it to Penny today at 10:21 and she's with clients, doesn't get it, whatever, she opens her email at 4 p.m. today. When does she write on the bottom of that last page?
10:21.
10:21.
When it was
Because
delivered.
that's when it was delivered.
Email
Correct.
When it was delivered.
That was correct.
Yes, but I had an agent tell me, well, I didn't see it till the next day, and I'm like,
Right.
time to go the essence.
Right.
It was there waiting
Yep.
on you.
Right. So if I've delivered it to Penny at 10:21 and she's on a cruise and doesn't get it for 3 more days, that's
Too bad, so sad.
yeah, that's Penny's issue to deal with.
Yeah.
So the acceptance occurs when the final contract has been delivered. We get a lot of questions that, you know, so what happens if I send it to Penny 3 days from now? Penny still hasn't sent back the signed bottom of the last page, the ratification on the bottom, and my clients call and say, hey, we actually want to go buy a different house. We don't want to buy that house, but they haven't sent it back to us yet, so we're good to do that, right?
No.
It's under
Like it's
contract.
not- Right.
It's ratified.
It's
Email.
it is an official contract. The meeting of the minds is right. The meeting of the minds has
That's
happened.
a secret.
So right. So what's the answer?
When you get the email, apparently.
Right.
When you get the email.
When you get the
Like you
email.
were saying, if
Right.
I don't
It
pick
was
that email
delivered.
up till 6 o'clock tonight,
Right.
when I ratify it, I'm still looking at the email.
Yep.
When that agreed upon
Correct.
contract by all parties came
Correct.
to me, and that's the time I'm putting on it.
Correct. Yep. You put the time on it that when you received it, and it doesn't
Fair
matter. It
change.
doesn't matter if that person has filled it out and sent it back to you. It doesn't matter if they ever fill it back and send it back to you. The ratification, the two parties are under contract when delivery of that final contract happens.
Which
Whether-
is why
whether
it's
the bottom has
courteous and helpful to your own self to send a text and say, hey, I sent the contract back.
Right.
Thank you for mentioning that, Eric, because I can tell you, I've had some hit my junk mail
And you didn't know
and
it.
you not know it's
Right,
there,
yep.
you know.
Me too.
Yeah, so this is it's good because we got some experienced agents in here, and some of the newer agents can learn some best practices and things, right? When you send an offer,
We also have a birthday girl.
it doesn't hurt to
Happy
birthday.
We'll get you up to class.
So yeah, I'm gonna try to
Dance
power.
Party
I'm
USA.
gonna try to power through here so we don't take all day with the class, but yeah, so that's a big thing, right? I mean, obviously in this room with our 10 or 15 people we have in here, there wasn't a consensus on how that works, but the correct answer is that you are under contract as soon as that contract is delivered, whether the ratification on the bottom of the last page happens or not.
As long as you're not waiting on any return initial change.
Correct, yeah, as long as, that's exactly right.
So
Contract
Matt, real
acceptance.
quick, can I back you up just one spot and point out what you taught me a long time ago?
Sure.
Is that, and a lot of agents do this, and I used to do it myself too, the buyer and seller thing. Say Laura's my buyer, and you're the agent, and your person is Penny Broach, and most of the time in MLS, all it says is Broach, which is normal. We're not wanting to put our people, but it's the right thing to do, and it's courteous to go look it up and find that.
Yep.
Because if you add Penny's name to it, that has to be initialed now.
Right, yep. Yeah, that's the case, and that's the case no matter what, we never want to take the MLS for facts.
Right.
So it happens a good bit that you'll look on the MLS and it will say the owner is John Doe, and you look in the tax records on the MLS that you can access straight from the MLS. The tax records are really what to go by. So it could be that the tax records say Jonathan Doe, or they might say Bob Smith. And if that happens, at the very least, we should be calling the other agent and say, hey, MLS says John Doe, tax records say Bob Smith, like what happened here? And it's possible that Bob Smith passed away and left the house to John Doe, and that just hasn't shown up yet on the tax records, but that's still something that you want to know, because you need to know if it says something different. I don't want to write a contract with a name that's different than what is official on the tax records, unless I know and I have proof or in writing that something is different there, because I don't want to bind my potential buyer to a seller that's not a real thing, right? So we want to make sure that we have that. And if that's the case, I would generally say, okay, great, if you could just send me over the estate document, or if you could send me over the deed of distribution that shows that Bob Smith is the owner now instead of John Doe, that would be great, and then I can put that in my file and we move forward.
Yeah.
It also doesn't hurt to call the listing agent and clarify what the legal name is.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was saying. Just talking to the listing agent, making sure you know.
And also, if you're trying to hurry and get this house for your client, if you don't do some work and find the seller's full name or whatever it is, and it has to be changed, now you don't have a contract until that's initialed.
Yeah.
So you're not doing your buyer in this instance a disservice.
Exactly right.
You're moving before we move on from the whatchamacallit here, the due diligence period. Is there a reason, like, I know I've only been here for 6 years, but like, is there a reason why it's already automatically determined that there's 6 business days for due diligence period and that's not negotiable, or 10? Why is that not? Why is that already written in the contract?
Let's talk about that when we get to due diligence period.
Oh, I thought we were.
No, we're just on contract acceptance. So,
Close.
all right. So, next thing is closing. Obviously, the closing is defined when the closing attorney disperses funds. That seems like a very simple thing. Obviously, that's when the closing happens, right? When you go and sign paperwork and the seller gets their money. But especially in this market, know that is when the closing happens. People do not get keys before your seller has money. And do not allow your buyer to get their keys before the seller has their money.
That means funds have dispersed.
That is right. Like when the seller has the money in their bank account, or the attorney says the money has been wired, then okay, there's been a closing. You can exchange the keys. But until that point,
horror story about where 3 agents had to buy a house.
right? Yeah, I mean, I can tell you horror stories for myself. I mean, I've told this I think in the last class, but I had back in the previous market crash, I sold 3 houses, and the money never showed up. But I had already given people keys, so it was a relatively common thing back then that a dry closing happens Friday. Oh, the banks will get around to it. We'll figure everything out. Money will show up Monday, but we give them keys so they can go ahead and move in over the weekend. You know, that's what it was. And I did that, and the money never showed up, and the banks went out of business. And so I had 3 people living in my houses that I technically still owned, and they were like, we did what we did. We signed our paperwork. Like, what the heck? And so one of them moved out, or I think it was actually 2 people. One of them moved out, and one of them I had to evict. So it's a thing. And fortunately, there wasn't a bunch of damage done to my place or anything like that. But I mean, if they would have moved in and burnt that house down over the weekend, whose insurance is covering that? Or no one's, because I gave that to, I let them do it, basically. It's the same thing where if you're, it's the same thing where
I'm sitting at the table and they're like, oh, you can go ahead. And I'm like, well, I'll put my
When
hand
we do our
on
new
it.
construction stuff, like we don't, if funds haven't hit the counter, we don't get
Okay,
keys at all.
that's right.
That's not a
It's not- yeah, it's not-
We
because if-
tell,
because if
this
you-
is not a drill.
Yeah,
You're not getting keys.
no,
You're
you don't
moving
get
out.
the
New construction is even more important because
know
once
what else I
you
hear a
give
lot of?
keys, it's not new anymore, right?
That's right.
So
And you know what else I hear a lot of?
Our refrigerator's gonna be delivered 2 days before closing. No customer put it.
Another thing I hear a lot of is this whole lease back thing. And I'm like, Lord, Lori says you can put it on me. My answer every single time is gonna be, heck no.
Yep.
You cannot lease back. And I hit right. And I'm like, no, you don't wanna do that, you guys, because you're opening yourself up all kind of legal.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that is like if the car,
Yeah.
if you let somebody borrow your car, if you give the keys to somebody and they wind up stealing your car, your insurance doesn't cover it because you allow them to do that. It's very similar to if you hand somebody keys to get in your house and something happens. All right, so broker, that just defines who we are as brokers. Notice and delivery. This gives you all the different ways that notice and delivery can happen. I don't know who's still faxing in 2023, but we left that in there. Property. So this defines what your property looks like or what your property is. So subdivision, address, tax map number, county. I will tell you as much as you can get on there from the tax records. Again, don't trust the MLS. Happens all the time that people copy a previous listing and forget to change the tax map number or an address or whatever. Make sure that you're going by the tax records from this. Sometimes they'll have lot, block, and phase on a tax record. The most important thing is if you can put a subdivision in there, that's great. Address obviously is very important. City and zip code is important. Tax map number is important, and county is important. Lot, block, and phase. If you can get them in there, great. If you don't have them or aren't sure of them, it's better to leave them blank than to put in something wrong. But without a doubt, address, tax map number, and county are what's needed there. All right, and then price. Obviously, that's where we write the price in. I usually, one of my little tricks is if I'm writing a price in and I'm making an offer, I will usually add .00, just because it makes the offer look better. It makes it look like a bigger number. So if I'm countering back from a seller, I usually don't put the .00 because it makes it look like a smaller number, so the buyer might feel like they're getting better. I don't know if that ever works or not, but somebody told me that a long time ago, and I've done it ever since. All right, so expiration of offer. This is when the offer from the buyer can be withdrawn. So one of the things that I tell sellers in this is, sellers a lot of times will see an offer come through and be very, it says it expires at 5 p.m. on whatever day, and at 5:01 you're getting a phone call. Hey, we not heard back. What are we doing? And at the end of the day, the offer can be withdrawn, but there's nothing that obligates the seller to respond by that time. And so I tell my buyers, this is a very, very soft deadline because there's not any teeth to it. If the seller just decides they're not going to respond, you don't get money from them or anything. It's just they decide not to respond by that point. The script I usually use is if they call you back and say, hey, if they call you back at 6 o'clock and say, okay, we've accepted, we're sending the contract over, are you going to say, oh, heck no, you took too long? Probably not, right? Like, you make your offer. All this does is it gives you the option to say, hey, we're walking away. Like, my offer is only good to this point, so if they don't call you back until 8 o'clock, you can say, well, no, sorry, if you want to, but most likely you're going to move forward with the offer. They just took a little bit longer. So, go ahead.
So with countering, is it important to change that date and timestamp?
So that is something that not everyone does, but it is something that you can do. Just make sure that, to clarify, Penny asked, is that something that's important to do when counter offering also? And that is something that if you don't do it, then your offer is open forever unless you send a withdrawal of that offer or counter offer, whichever it is. So if you send a counter offer and let's say, I'm a buyer, I make an offer to Penny's clients. Penny sends us a counter offer back, and my clients are in the middle of negotiating something else, doing something different, whatever. There's no expiration on the counter offer that Penny sent back. A week goes by, and that other deal doesn't work out, and my people say, hey, let's just go ahead and accept that other counter. We come back and sign Penny's counter and send it back to her. We're under contract. So having an expiration on the counter offer is important. If you don't have an expiration on a counter, make sure that if your person, if Penny's people went under contract on something else in the meantime, there's a problem. And so if anything like that were to happen, we have to make sure we send an email, something in writing to the other agent saying, hey, we appreciate that you were involved, but my client has decided to withdraw their counter offer. It's no longer valid at this time.
Best practices I always do this: seller request a response on or before 5 p.m. blank date.
Yep. So you can do that, but that's a request, right? It's not a defined void if they take longer than that. So what you can do on the contract is if you it gets messy because you got to cross through buyer and write seller, right? And then cross through the time and date and write new date, new time. And then next time then you cross through it, write buyer again. Because it says this offer from buyer will be withdrawn. So if the seller is sending back a counter offer, you got to cross through buyer and write seller.
But it might get messy, however, you can keep your
Yep.
out of the pickle.
It won't be as messy as it'll be if you get a counter offer accepted a week after you send it and they're already under contract. That will be way messier.
Because a fellow agent was telling me the other day, she's not with us, but she's a great agent, and she was telling me that she asked, like, she made an offer, the seller's agent was, okay, we're gonna, she was like, my people have a bunch of multiples, they're still waiting on, we chose y'all, like, we need y'all to, sometimes this is not hard and fast, she said, and the agent said, I'm just letting you know this time it really is. And then if you reply at 5:01, I can't guarantee you. And they got another offer 30 minutes later. Those people, the people that were up here, replied an hour later, and this agent was like, it's gone. We gave it to somebody else. And they're like, you can't do that. Or you knew I was coming. I told you. And she's like,
Yep.
you missed the deadline and you didn't inform me. So, and that's right?
Yep, that's right.
You miss it.
Yeah.
Technically, you can take another offer.
The thing is, it says this offer from buyer will be withdrawn at blank o'clock. So it's withdrawn at that time.
Okay.
Now, if they go back and sign it and the buyer says okay and signs off and everything else, then that's fine.
Yeah.
But it says it will be withdrawn. So that was it. When the market was really hot, that was a strategy some people had. When there's 3 houses they wanted, they'd make an offer with 2 hours of time. And they know it at the end, and they have the other two offers written, and if they haven't responded in those 2 hours, we're on to the next one. Here's an offer for this one with 2 hours of time. They don't respond, okay, we're on to the next one. Here's another offer with 2 hours of time, or an hour of time. And really, technically, they had 3 offers out there that could have been accepted at any time, but they had deniability on the other 2 to say, hey, you're expired. That offer is void. We're good. We're already under contract on something else. So whether you think that's ethical and right or not, like that's the thing that was being done. All right, so earnest money. This is another big change that we made in this new contract. So from the time that the previous contract was written, we have moved as an industry, primarily in our market, that real estate attorneys, and especially in our office, we'll talk about our office specifically, we don't hold earnest money. And so attorneys hold earnest money now. Our previous contract did not make many allowances for that, and so the contract now gives you the check boxes there. You can see under 6A that says earnest money to be held in trust by blank, which is a brokerage, attorney, or other, right? So you got the option to check that it's an attorney now, and blank earnest money is paid by, and that's check, cash, wire, or other. The other is there's some attorneys that have like a earnest or Zocum or Zocum, which is like an app that buyers can deposit earnest money through. So that's what that other is there for. Now, a big thing in this paragraph is that if you use paragraph B, there's a checkbox now that says that either it has been delivered to escrow agent or will be delivered to escrow agent by. That's a big change between this contract and the other contract. The other contract, it was assumed that if you put that the earnest money was there, it had already been deposited, and that was something that just realistically wasn't really how real estate was practiced. So we gave the option to say will be delivered to escrow agent by, and so now that's going to be the one that is used probably most often is that second checkbox. So, but note that next line: should earnest money not be delivered by a deadline, contract may be voided at seller's option.
So we fill out A and then we fill out B or C.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Or you technically it could be B and C depending on the deal, but A and B are going to be the most common things that you fill out. But MGC is holding earnest money, or Blair Cato or Gillis Law Firm or whoever is holding earnest money, and they are an attorney. It's $1,000 earnest money that's paid by check, and it will be delivered to escrow agent by. But the thing is, this creates an additional. It shouldn't create an additional obligation because we should have been doing this all along, but this now very much clearly defines that this is another obligation we have both for our buyers and our sellers to say, okay, and we are not to handle earnest money. This is something that has to go directly from our clients to the attorney or to whoever's holding the earnest money. It's not something that we go meet our client and pick that earnest money up and drop off at the attorney's office. That's something they have to handle their money and get it to the escrow agent as themselves. We can't facilitate that, unfortunately, which is why a wire or a Zocum or whatever is what we prefer. Because as soon as you take possession of that money, there's all kinds of real estate laws and obligations that happen, and that's why we have defined this now that's why the offices have moved toward other escrow agents rather than holding earnest money ourselves, because those obligations are more than what we are willing to take because of some LLR rulings that have happened in the past. So when we talk about will be delivered to escrow agent by, that line, you want to make sure that it's a time that you can verify that that's been done, and it's a time that is doable for your client as a buyer. So, and you want it to be clear. So some people will write 3 business days after ratification or something like that. You can do that. You just want to be really clear that you're writing business days, not days. And just know that gives you the actual 3 business days after ratification. So by 7:59 of whatever, you want to make sure that you can call and verify that it's been done by then. And as a seller's agent, we want to make sure that, hey, they said they were going to have it in there. I would prefer that you write a date, right? Like it'll be delivered to escrow agent by 5 p.m. on such and such a date, 5 p.m. on January 17th or whatever it is. Because that gives you really
48 hours after contract.
That's what I do. 48 hours after
That's what he's
ratification.
saying.
Yep. And you can do that. The thing is that so Richard, you say 48 hours after ratification. So if we go under contract on Friday at 2 p.m., they have to have it delivered to the attorney by Sunday at 2 p.m.
So that was business day. Oh, yeah.
You say 48 hours. That's not business days,
Yeah,
right?
that's true.
So
Should we put 2 business days with?
you can put 2 business days.
2 business days.
You can put 2 business days. I like to say a date and a time. And if it takes a week to negotiate and that time changes, I just make that as one. I mean, if we're negotiating for a week, we've obviously had plenty of time to realize that date's not going to work anymore. Let's change it to a different date. But it's whatever you prefer. Like I said, I wouldn't use 24 or 48 hours because like this coming weekend, you write a contract on Friday. Attorney's office is not going to be open Saturday, Sunday, or Monday because of Martin Luther King Day. So you wouldn't even be able to get it to them until Tuesday, probably. So you're before you're even almost under contract, you're out of contract.
Right.
And the seller gets a better offer over the weekend. They call on Tuesday and like, hey, you have the Tuesday at 8 a.m. Hey, you have the earnest money for this house yet? Nope. Okay, we're voiding. And we're moving on to the next one. Yeah. So.
Yeah, Lori told me one time, she said, never use hours. She said, put an exact day and exact time.
Yep.
She said, and it's fully negotiable, so y'all can both talk about it and get it to where you want, but she said, because the point today, I was like, wow, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, hours, just as a thing, I like to use what the contract uses because it's defined, right? Because like if you use hours, there's nowhere in here that's a definition of what business hours are or hours or whatever. Same thing with days. I don't like to use days because is that business days? Is it not? Days aren't really defined in the contract. Business days are defined in the contract. So if you're going to use days, I would use business days.
Also something like, especially for newer agents, when you do an earnest money, you have a closing attorney, preferably have that closing attorney that y'all are going to use hold the earnest money. But just to be aware, like if they do decide to use another closing attorney, you can't get explain how they can get that earnest money back from who.
Yeah, I mean there just has to be an agreement written up that everybody agrees upon. That so if you deposit earnest money with a certain attorney, and for some reason they deposited with one attorney and decided to use a different attorney for the closing, which is really rare, I would think. You want to have that figured out ahead of time. But if that were to happen, then everybody's got to sign an agreement saying, hey, on the contract that said we were depositing with Blair Cato, we're actually going to use MGC, and so all parties agree that earnest money will be moved from Blair Cato to MGC. But they also, the thing is, the sellers could say no to that because you're changing the contract at that point. Mm-hmm. So the sellers could say, nope, we don't want that to happen. We want the earnest money to be with Blair Cato. We feel like there's some funny business going on here or something. Who knows? Mm-hmm. So that's a change to the contract that you want to make sure that if that's pertinent, that you get agreed upon.
What happened to me in Florida, we had title companies down there, and so we would, like our brokerage had a specific title company we had to use. Right. and I don't know if it was like my first or second closing, I got to the closing table, and we had no earnest money. And yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, don't do that. All right, so I'm gonna get through here. So escrow agent, one of the things it says that allows for you to call and check with the attorney. So if you call to check with an attorney and they aren't willing to give you the information on whether earnest money has been deposited or not, this paragraph is what you show them. Escrow agent does not guarantee payment of funds accepted as earnest money if it's determined to be fraudulent or non-sufficient funds. The escrow agent holding earnest money will immediately notify all parties, and contract may be voided at the seller's option. It may be deposited in an interest-bearing account, et cetera, et cetera. And then paragraph E there is where I was just talking about. So if the escrow agent is an attorney, so if the attorney box is checked, the earnest money will be deposited and released as required by South Carolina law. And buyer and seller expressly waive any confidentiality rules that would prohibit escrow agent from disclosing failure to deposit funds in a timely manner. So in the past, if you called an attorney and said, hey, do you have earnest money yet? They would say, that's attorney-client privilege, I can't tell you. Like, unfortunately, I'd love to tell you, but I can't tell you. So this paragraph is what allows them to do that for you. So just know that you got that on your side. And then paragraph F defines how it works with the brokerage. That's very rare. That won't happen in our case, hopefully. So, but that just says that they've got to follow the SC code, and they're governed by the Real Estate Commission, whereas attorneys are governed by South Carolina law. So it makes it a little easier for them. They don't have quite as many regulations on what they have to do. But either way, you've got to have a written agreement. If there's earnest money that's disputed, you've got to have a written agreement that says how a termination is going to happen. We'll get to that later in the contract. All right, so conveyance, date of closing, and possession. So conveyance, date of closing, and possession is written in here. It defaults to a general warranty deed. So there are other types of deeds. If you're selling for someone who's a foreclosure place or sometimes a builder and using this contract, a lot of times you might have a seller that wants a limited or special warranty deed. That's something you can cross out general and just write in special or limited there. The deed will be prepared in the names of, and that is where you put how they're going to take title. And that has to have something in it. So that should never say TBD or NA or anything else. There should always be a legal name of people, or an LLC or an entity of some kind, trust, whatever it is. And then the transaction will be closed on or before. And so that gives the date that you're going to close. Generally speaking, in our market, that's going to be like a 30 to 45 days out. But it's something to be aware of is when you're figuring out when that date is going to be, make sure you're looking at your due diligence periods. We're going to get to due diligence periods in a little bit, but there are times when holidays fall, I was going to say properly, but maybe improperly. When holidays fall in a certain way, it could be almost a month for you to get through your 10 days of due diligence and your 5 days of negotiation period. When it's 15 business days, that can be a long time when you have a couple holidays in there. Like we just went through Christmas and New Year holidays. So that can add some days depending on when you're writing the contract and what holidays are there. So that's definitely something you want to check on. You don't want to get yourself into, we're closing 2 days after our due diligence ends, and then people can walk away and you're only 2 days out from closing. So make sure you give yourself enough time there to get through that due diligence period. That's more from a seller perspective than a buyer perspective. Paragraph 7A there says the seller will be obligated to vacate and give possession of the property. And we added free of debris and in a clean condition to a couple different places. It used to only be in one place in the contract. But we want to be clear about that. Free of debris and in a clean condition to buyer, either at closing as defined in paragraph 2C, 24 hours after, 48 hours after, or in accordance with attached agreement. It's my opinion and belief that you either check the first box or the last box, and you never check the second or third. If it's going to be delivered 24 hours after or 48 hours after, you need to have an agreement in place. So never check that second or third box. If it's going to be a delayed possession or something like that, always check that last box and have an agreement written up that defines what that possession is going to look like.
Is there anywhere in there that explains what a clean condition is?
So that's a great question. People ask that all the time. there's not really a way to define what clean condition is. Everybody thinks that's different, right? So everybody's opinion of what that is
Your
different.
clean
So
and someone else's clean is two different.
right, so exactly. My version of clean, my version of clean, your version of
Everybody's
clean,
got their own definition.
everybody's version of clean is a different definition. And so what my script is for that is when you are looking at a house with someone and they're contemplating making an offer, you can say, hey, just so you know, this is this person's version of clean. Like they knew you were coming. This is as good as this house will ever look because they are trying to sell it to you. So it's going to look like this, or possibly worse. It's not going to look better. And so if you feel like clean, your version of clean is better than this, we need to write in our contract that the seller will have the house professionally cleaned prior to closing. So that's the best way I know to do it. Is hey, this is their version of clean. If it's not your version of clean, we got to do something different. Because the last thing I usually will explain to people, that this is their version of clean. There's 2 dogs in this house that they had to take out and put in the back for us to look at it. Yada yada. There's a bunch of couches. There's a bunch of rugs and things. When they take that stuff out, like it doesn't say that they've got to come in here with a mop and mop up and do whatever. It just says clean and free of debris. So if you feel like hairballs are debris and they don't feel like hairballs are debris, you might have some hairballs when you
That's
show
one of
up.
those contingency
And so-
things, plan to be professionally planned
Right.
before.
Yeah. So if you feel if any of that's going to be a problem, if you are not planning on coming in here and cleaning this house before you move in, I'd probably ask for a professional cleaning prior to closing.
Yep, and I'd go check too before you go.
And you can bring some addendum and break it down and be like, all that stuff that's in the shed
You can do that
must
if
be
you want.
gone. Because then they can get to the walkthrough the day before and be like, well, I didn't know you meant the shed too.
And another thing that you can do is you can say, like, if you're going to say professionally clean, you may want to say professionally clean after home has been vacated, because they could have it professionally cleaned and tomorrow and it's clean. But we had it professionally clean. We lived here for 30 days afterwards. But if we had it professionally clean before closing, we met the requirement. But not exactly what you meant.
And don't
So-
ask for that as in the repair. I can tell you how many times that's shown up. Cleaning is not a repair.
Right. Yeah.
You should ask for that in the contract negotiations.
Right. Agreed.
Right.
All right. And so the paragraph 7B, this is what some people call the automatic extension paragraph, but it is not an automatic extension paragraph. If the buyer has provided a loan commitment or in a cash transaction, they've met the terms and conditions of paragraph 12B, but they haven't closed within the time period of the contract, both parties agree to extend the contract for a period not to exceed 5 business days. And so I've had lenders call and say, hey, we're almost done. I know we're coming up against the deadline, but we got the automatic 5 days, so don't worry. It's like, well, no, sir. That very clearly says written loan commitment. So if they have provided written loan commitment, then there can be an automatic 5-day extension. The goal of that paragraph is, if we have a snow event in Columbia and everything just shuts down, or we have a flood like there was in 2015 or 16, whatever that was, things like that just prevent business from being able to be done, then we don't want one party or the other to be able to say, oh, well, sorry, you didn't close on time. The attorney's office has been closed for 3 days, but sorry, we're moving on. So that's really what that's for. And that paragraph has been attempted to be misused a lot, but I just want to make sure you know that is not an automatic extension. There's requirements that have to be met for that to happen. That's not a 5 days to allow them more time to figure out their loan or to do whatever. All right, so fixtures and personal property. So we added some things to this paragraph. That's something to talk about, obviously. Video doorbells, things like that, video cameras have become a lot more prevalent since our last version of the contract. So this is what defines what a fixture is and what a fixture isn't. And so the sale of this property includes all fixtures, equipment, and improvements of any kind which now exist or are attached to or planted on the premises, such as, but not limited to, and it defines all of those things, right? So this is where we know that TV wall mounts and brackets are included. The TV isn't, but the wall mounts and brackets are, right? Curtain and drapery rods, blinds are included, but it does not say curtains are included, right? So the curtain and drapery rods are, ceiling fans and remotes are. A lot of these things are things that we've learned by trial and error over the years, right? So, there's a ceiling fan, it's awesome, there's no switch in the wall though, and there's a remote, but the people pack the remote, or the movers pack the remote. Same thing with garage door openers. So it's not a bad idea as an agent to just kind of make a little inventory of what's there. And then on the walkthrough, make sure that it's still there. Walk through, make sure you got garage door openers, make sure you got remotes for ceiling fans, anything like that. Another thing that it defines here in the and we reorganized these. If you're familiar with the last contract, again, there was a lot of these that just kept getting added on the end, and they got all out of whack. And so we kind of organized them into things that are inside the home, things that are outside the home, like landscape lighting, lawn irrigation, stuff like that, and then things that are inside the home. So at the end of this paragraph, it defines appliances. So stoves and ovens, dishwashers, any built-in appliance are considered fixtures. So if you have a built-in refrigerator, that's a fixture. You've got a built-in refrigerator and it has panels that match the cabinets, or if you have one of those big commercial ones that's built in that needs to be a tool used to get it out, then that would be a fixture. That's the best way I know to define what a fixture is in most cases, is if it takes a tool to take it down or loosen it or whatever, then it's probably a fixture. The only thing that is not the case for, as defined in this paragraph, is vanity mirrors. So if you look the third line up from the bottom of paragraph 8, it says attached or hanging bathroom vanity mirrors. And so even if the vanity mirror is hanging from a hook, it's still considered a fixture per our contract. Even though it's not the legal definition of a fixture, our contract defines it as a fixture. All right. If anything other than anything that is a fixture that you want to have included in the contract, just make sure that you define that on a separate bill of sale, and that's what that last sentence there in the paragraph says. One thing, I'm sorry, we're on page 2, going to page 3, and I've just thought to also mention one other thing. The way to know for you all, the way to know that you're using the right contract or right addenda, is we added also on the bottom left of this contract, we added form numbers. So it says CCRA-01. So every one of our CCRA forms is going to say a form number at the bottom of it if it's a current form. If it doesn't, if you're using a CCRA form and it does not have a form number on the bottom of it, you're using an older obsolete form. So just know that as well. The South Carolina forms, they all have an SCR form number. I think the MLS forms have a form number. So if you're using a form that doesn't have a form number, it's probably an obsolete form, and reach out and make sure that you get a copy, or that you ask us about it. We'll get you a copy of the most current one. But all the current CCRA forms are in DocuSign now and available on our DocuSign rooms. All right, sorry, I forgot to mention that to start with.
Dotloop 2 or just Dotloop?
Dotloop, you would have to submit your. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I think that CCRA has a direct relationship with Dotloop, so it should have updated. But if you specifically have templates that you've saved in Dotloop, then your templates aren't going to automatically update because they're your templates that you made. So you have to re-template them. Yeah. However, what I'll tell you is a couple of the changes that were made in DocuSign may make it so you don't want to use Dotloop anymore, because they've now changed how the signing and the templates work in DocuSign, so it's more of a living document now instead of a flat PDF. So I'll get to that in a little bit. All right, so home warranty coverage. This is where you can ask for a home warranty. It either will or will not be provided at closing, and the premium will be paid either by the buyer or the seller in the amount of blank provided by blank and written by blank. So this is also a paragraph that you must check will or will not. We see this paragraph blank a lot. And again, it either is or isn't. And if you don't have it checked, it's not a complete contract, and arguments can be made that you don't have a valid contract because you don't have everything filled out. So if you ever see a box that's will or will not, check one of them. If you check will, the rest of these boxes need to be filled out. Because you can't say, yeah, home warranty is going to be included, but we don't know how much it's going to cost, or who's going to write it, or how it's going to work, or who's paying for it. If you check will, you've got to have the rest of the boxes checked. Generally speaking, as a buyer, a lot of times in previous markets, it hasn't happened as much recently, but you're usually going to write this in there and ask the seller to cover the home warranty for you. But you need to have the home warranty brochure to know exactly which warranty they want and what the costs of it are. So that's $596 or it's $724 or whatever it is, depending on what warranty you're using. And it's being provided by America's Preferred or 210 or Old Republic or whoever you're using. And if it's a company that you have the brochure for, that you're picking those numbers based on that brochure, you write that you're the buyer's agent that's gonna put that into place for them. And you fill out the application and send it in. If it's already included, some listings will already have it included. And so you just got to make sure you get the information. You don't just say, You don't just say, hey, the seller's including a home warranty, and so you say, yep, it will be provided, and the seller's agent's gonna do it, and we'll just leave everything else blank. You gotta know what warranty they're providing, by what company, and how much it's gonna cost, and put it in the contract. Partly because you want the contract to be right, but also you wanna make sure you know what warranty your client's getting, and they know what they're getting. Because they might not want that warranty, they might not want, one over the other. They might have used America's Preferred before and had a great experience, and they don't wanna use T10, but they might have, vice versa, they might have had T10 and had a great experience, and they don't wanna use America's Preferred. So make sure you know that before, so you're not surprised at closing, and it's not just the bare bones basic warranty that doesn't really cover anything for them. If they want the upgrade, they should have the option of getting the upgrade. All right, so then moving on to number 2. So we are halfway through our time here, and I am 1/6 of the way through the contract, so I'll pick up the pace here a little bit. We got a lot more questions this time and discussion this time than before. So transaction cost. This is what defines buyer's transaction cost and seller's transaction cost. The big change here in this paragraph is that we made buyers and sellers bold, so it clearly defines the difference between the two. And we also added to the buyer's transaction costs, toward the end of that buyer's transaction cost, you can see that it says previously agreed upon real estate brokerage fees and the cost of any inspector, appraiser, or survey. So what this allows for is if you are a buyer's agent and you're working a deal and you have your buyer agency that says that you're going to be paid 3%, and let's say the MLS listing is only offering a 2% co-broke. Well, there's a percent difference there between what you've agreed on with your client and what is being offered on the MLS. So this allows those closing costs to be titled buyer's closing costs. So if they ask the seller to pay their closing costs, that 1% can be paid out of the seller's paid closing costs. And that's what this next paragraph is in paragraph A or B, you do one or the other. You can see A or in the right here in between, right here, it says or, right? So it's one or the other. Either in paragraph A, everybody's going to pay their own cost, buyer's going to pay their cost, seller's going to pay theirs, or paragraph B, where the buyer is asking the seller to pay a certain amount of closing costs for them. And so it hasn't happened very often. If you've been in the business less than a couple of years, you probably haven't ever had a situation where the buyer asks the seller to pay closing costs, but that is generally a pretty common thing that happens in the real estate industry. A buyer may have a certain amount of down payment to put down, and they need some help with the closing costs, so they want to kind of build it into the transaction, have the seller pay for it for them.
Matt,
Yep.
have we figured out a way, work around, if you will, on the VA buyers?
Nope. So caveat to what I said. So in this paragraph B, you put in, so you get a lot of questions from you agents that say, well, the buyer wants all their closing costs covered. Well, you can't write all in that paragraph. It's got to be a defined number, because you can't just say, hey, Mr. Seller, we want you to cover any and all expenses that the buyer has. They might get a survey, they might not. They might get home inspections and charge you for it, they might not. They're actually paying me a 20% commission, so you got to make up the other 17%. Like, all doesn't define a number. The seller has to have a number that they've defined as their maximum number that they're paying for the buyer. So what is generally recommended is to talk, if there's a loan involved, which is a common on most transactions, is to talk to that lender and get with them and figure out what their loan estimate says as the estimated closing costs. And there's two options there. If you talk to the lender and they say, yeah, it looks like it's going to be about $5,500. It could be plus or minus a few hundred, but it looks like about $5,500. You could ask for $5,500. If it comes back and it was only $5,200, then what happens is that seller allowed to pay $5,500, but they're only going to pay $5,200. So you probably could have gotten your buyer a $300 better deal by only asking for $5,200 and then deducting $300 off the price. If you ask for $5,500 and it turns out to be $6,200, then you just got to know that you're going to use all of the 52 or 55, but your buyer is going to come out of pocket for the other 700 because it didn't cover the whole amount. And so I will usually, you put that in front of the buyer and give them the option. Do you want to kind of overestimate? Make sure we got to cut. Like, if you don't have any extra money, we can overestimate. It might mean you're giving up a few $100 in price because you're asking them to pay more and they're going to want a higher price to cover that what they're paying, but you can feel pretty confident you're going to have all your costs covered. Or would you rather make sure that you're using all of that money and you don't want to overpay for anything? You've got some extra money lying around, and if you have to pay a few $100 or $1,000, then that's okay with you. which one of those do you prefer, and then that's how you rewrite the contract, right? So what Renee was asking was if it does come down to having to build in buyer transaction costs or buyer brokerage fees, that is not allowable with a VA loan. A VA buyer is not allowed to pay buyer agent brokerage fees. So
Can they pay, and this is just on the buyer agency agreement, where there's that section where you can write fees in?
So if the mortgage company doesn't allow it, so if it's on a document that the mortgage company has to approve or see or whatever, they won't approve it. They won't be okay with it. So I mean, I'm not an attorney, but if you said, hey, my fee is this, and they wrote you a check up front, it probably would be fine. But the mortgage company is also going to go back and validate their account, and so that, hey, what's this $3,000 check for? Oh, that was my commission. Oh, well, that just voided your VA loan. So
We just got less than 1% on a $400,000 house because it was a VA buyer and the builder was only giving.
Yep, and so during this process, we talked to the VA, and I mean, it was amazing the responses we got from them. They were basically like, we feel like our veterans are educated enough to make decisions, and whatever. I'm like, oh, okay, so you just feel like real estate agents aren't necessary, and so we shouldn't be paid at all anyway. All right, good to know that's your stance, I guess.
Right.
So it was mind-boggling the responses we got, but it's what it is. So I could anticipate that changing. I mean, they did just eliminate the requirement for CL 100 to be paid by the seller because of the market. So I mean, there's a lot of us know that there's some lawsuits out there about the buyer agent commissions and things, which is why we did this, to anticipate the results of some of those lawsuits. And so if it turns out that buyers have to pay their own costs, their own commissions, and sellers have to pay their own commissions, then I can't imagine the VA not being okay with that. That just says, okay, from now on, all VA clients can't have agents, essentially. So I can't imagine them not changing guidelines if that were to happen. But right now it hasn't happened, and that's their current stance.
Yeah.
All right. So adjustments is the next paragraph. So paragraph 11, real estate taxes, all prorations. So my script for this paragraph with my clients is, this is where it says that you are going to get a clean slate at closing. Everything's going to be prorated to the date of closing, and you're going to be responsible for everything after closing. The caveat to that is, if you look at our paragraph, if you're used to the state contract, this contract is very different because it defines that taxes are going to be based on the most current. Let me move this thing out of the way. I don't know what that is. So the second line in that paragraph 11, tax prorations pursuant to this contract are to be based on the most current tax bill and prorated on that basis. Buyer will be responsible for applying for any applicable exemptions, et cetera, et cetera. So it also says all prorations are final. Where does it say that? Yeah, in the very last line of this paragraph, all prorations are final, including any tax refund due to the change in occupancy status unless otherwise agreed to in writing. So what that means is the only accurate information. What used to happen was attorneys would kind of have free reign to determine how their proration was going to work. Some would use the last tax bill, some would use the future estimate, some would account for the fact that there's going to be a change in assessed value and use that estimate. It was a total free-for-all in how they were doing, and no one ever knew until you got to the closing table. And so we had to define it as something. So in this paragraph, it's defined as the most current tax bill. So if you have a owner-occupant who is buying from an investor, if your owner-occupant's buying from an investor, it's at a 6% tax rate, that tax proration is going to be done at the 6% tax rate. So your buyer could potentially get, let's say the overall tax bill is $6,000 as a 6% rate. They're closing on June 30th, so halfway through the year, they would get a $3,000 proration from the seller. Well, on July 15th, they go down and apply for their owner-occupied exemption, and that tax bill goes down to $1,800. It doesn't matter. It's fine. The prorations are final at closing, so your buyer just got $3,000 for half of a year of taxes that are going to wind up only costing him $1,800 at the end of the year.
That's nice.
Yeah,
So-
When you're on the buyer side.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Right.
I'm writing it in that my seller's gonna get at whatever the buyer's buying it at.
So, right, well, so that can happen, which is great for your buyers. It's awful in the reverse. So when you're working with a seller who's an investor or a non-owner occupant, whatever, and that's at the 6% rate, then you want to try to protect that seller. So the best way to do that is to go to the county website and do a tax estimate based on the sale. You want to adjust the sales price because let's say that investor has owned it for 20 years. That assessment is going to be a lot lower than what the sales price is probably, right? And so you can try to keep it at that assessment and then go to the owner occupied version and say, hey, it's $100,000 at owner occupied rate. And so here's what the tax estimate is. Both sides are going to agree to prorate taxes based on the attached estimate of blank dollars. And that's exactly how I would do it. The attached estimate of blank dollars is what the proration is going to be based on. You don't want to just say, it's going to be prorated based on owner occupant rate. Nobody knows what the owner occupant rate is. What does that mean? Like if you're closing any time during the year, the tax bills have not come out yet. So you don't know what that owner occupied rate will be. How do you determine it? Well, you determine it from that tax estimate. So go ahead and do the estimate, attach it to the contract, and say prorations are going to be based upon this contract or this estimate. If that were to happen and that comes to you as the buyer and the seller has sent that to you, make sure that they're sending it at the sales price though, right? Don't let them send it at the assessed value. Because if it's $100,000 assessed value and they send it over at owner occupied rate, but your person's actually purchasing it for $200,000, you want to make sure that you adjust the estimate to say, no, it's going to be a $200,000 AT, because when a house sells, it's immediately reassessed for the determined value by the county, which is almost always the purchase price. So if it sells for $200,000, they're going to adjust the assessment to $200,000, which obviously is going to double the taxes from what it would have been at $100,000. So you want to make sure that whatever that estimate is as accurate as possible. It's in the right district for the right price, and then both sides agree to that estimate, and then that's what the attorneys have to go by. The attorneys can't just not honor that. You also have to realize there's some attorneys that don't pay a whole lot of attention, and the state contract is not this way. So if you're operating somewhere else or with an attorney who isn't used to using our contract, I've had it happen numerous times that they try to prorate based on some estimate or something. And if we're in the case where my buyer's buying from somebody who's at 6%, and they try to do an estimate, I'm going to look at that and say, no. It's done on last year's tax bill. You can't do an estimate. It's done on last year's tax bill. Do it by the contract. You can't just change the contract because you're a closing attorney that wants to do an estimate. And I've had that argument, I would say 4 or 5 times with attorneys, and I show them the contract, and they wind up hey, you're right, I didn't realize, and they go back and change it. And it's several $1,000s usually for our client. So don't just assume that attorneys are doing things right. Make sure you're checking that they're doing things by contract, right? All right, so financing. So this is where it says the buyer's obligation in this contract is or is not contingent on obtaining financing. And that expires 5 business days prior to and not including the closing date. So it's contingent on financing up until 5 days prior to closing. So again, when you're working for the buyer, if you're getting close to closing and you don't have a final approval from a lender, you need to start getting an extension and extend the closing date in paragraph, I believe it's 7. Yeah. So if you're at the 6th day or 7th day and you don't have confidence that you're going to have an approval prior to that, inside that 5th day, go ahead and have that extension ready and send it over. Because if you get within that 5-day window and hear something back that's negative, that they're not going to be able to close, they're on the hook to lose their earnest money and possibly get sued. Because they have broken the contract at that point. It's no longer contingent. So that's just a fact of the matter. You gotta have that extension ready, and extend the closing date. Now, in other cases, if let's say that you've got a deal, you're working with a seller, and you've gone on and you're close to closing, and they're like, hey, this is happening and that's happening. They can't get here in time for closing, or whatever it is, we're going to send you an extension. if that were to happen, especially on a deal that continues to extend and continues to extend and continues to extend, if that were to happen, what I do is I say, yes, we're extending the closing date, but all other financing contingencies and all other things are now void. So like, yes, if you want more time to close, then that's fine. We'll give you more time to close because you can't get here or your mom's in the hospital or whatever it is. But the lender has had enough time now to get you qualified. And so I'm not going to extend this 3 weeks only to also extend, if you just extend the date in paragraph 7, all the contingencies and all the things move with that date, right? So if you can say, I'm gonna draw a line in the sand where yes, all the contingencies are done, but we're gonna move that closing date. So we're moving the closing date, but if you can't get financing between now and then you're done. Because you're already within 3 days of closing. You're already past that financing contingency time. So if I'm gonna give you an extension now, I'm not extending that time. Because that is a, I'm not gonna say trick, but that's a strategy that some agents will use. Is if they get within that 3 days and they're like, oh crap, I don't think we're gonna get financed. Let's just get an extension quick, and my financing contingency extends with that thing. So I'm in my 5 days right now, and they lose their earnest money. But if I can get an extension, then that 5 days extends with it. Then we're free and clear. And then we can back out and be outside of our 5 days at that point. So as a seller's agent, you have to just be aware of that and say, no, you're already inside your 5 days. We'll extend, but we're not extending the financing contingency. All right, let's see. So then the additional part of paragraph 12 there is financing type. So conventional, FHA, VA, all the different options. Buyer or buyer's agent will immediately notify seller or seller's agent if financing type changes. If it modifies the term of the contract, the seller has the option of agreeing with the change or voiding the contract. So, if somebody says cash and they decide to go, USDA or VA or FHA, or there's some additional costs that are going to be included for the seller could say, no, I'm not going to pay those costs, and you can't change. And if you do, I'm just going to void the contract. It also defines there that the FHA and VA addendum will be signed by the buyer and seller. It used to be that was always done with the contract, but now most lenders have their own version they want signed. So we just say, hey, you're going to get this, and we're going to agree that we're going to sign it at the time you get it. Application for financing, if lender is being used, the buyer has 5 business days from the date of acceptance to apply for financing. Application includes advancements of funds, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is something that the next paragraph, which is the first paragraph on page 4, should the buyer fail to apply for the loan within 5 business days, the buyer will be in default, and the seller will have the option of avoiding it and keeping the earnest money. So that's a very big thing that I think a lot of people don't take seriously. But if you're working with a seller, that's a thing. I mean, if you're calling to verify earnest money's been deposited, you also need to be calling the lender to say, hey, have they completed a full approval and given funds for appraisal or whatever needs to happen? Like, are they fully in process? Because if they're not, it can be voided. And if you don't find that out until the 20th day that they didn't act quick enough, that's not good for your seller. Technically, if you find out on the 20th day, you can still, it's still outside of that 5 days. So if you find out 20 days in that they didn't apply until the 8th day, there's no deadline to when it can be voided by that financing contingency. So you got to know that 5 days is very important for your buyer to apply within that time period. Number 2, if it's rejected, you got to let them know. You can't just go around town shopping without letting the seller know if the loan's rejected. The seller can elect to void the contract at that point, as long as the earnest money is released to the buyer in that case, as long as it's not within the 5 business days. So if that financing contingency needs to be used, then you got to let them know immediately. You can't just go shop around and then the buyer will get their earnest money back. This is another big one. If the buyer elects to make any material change to their financial condition, then that would make it so they can't get the loan. The buyer's in default. So the buyer, that can be they go buy a car, that can be they go buy new furniture on a credit card, and that shows up when they run the last credit check before closing. That can also be they change jobs. There's a lot of things that are surprising that you want to talk to your clients and just say, hey, keep your life as vanilla as you can while you're going through this closing process. Because like I had a guy that was a security guard, and he changed jobs about a week before closing to being a mail postman. And he was getting paid significantly more money, but the bank denied financing because he's like, well, I'm making more money, what the heck? But he had gotten a degree in criminal justice. He'd been a security guard with various organizations for like 15 years. And then all of a sudden he's a mailman. And so the bank felt like that was a risk. Like you're going outside your field of study, you're going outside your field of experience. Like we don't know if that's gonna last. You can get fired next week and they don't need money. So they didn't make the loan. And so he got sued. The seller sued him. So that extra money that he made for being a mailman went away pretty quick in that lawsuit. So that's something that like I felt guilty about because I was like, man, did I not make this clear enough to him that not to change jobs? Is that my fault? So it's just something you want to make sure you're telling people about. So seller financing. In the case of seller financing, just make sure you have an agreement. Don't go by this contract. If you're going to have seller financing on a deal, make sure that you got that figured out. And there's an attorney involved writing that up for you. Cash transaction. So instead of having to apply for financing, you got to provide proof of funds within 5 business days. The thing we added here was that, or the partial availability of funds if remaining funds are being sourced from the sale of another property. So if you got to sell your house in order to buy something for cash, just make sure that allows for that now, that you can show that that's what's happening. You just have to prove that you got the funds. So hey, they owe this and it's selling for this, and there's going to be a difference. Hey Renee, there's a book out there on that table for you, I think, to grab.
Okay.
Yep. Yes. All right, so appraisal value contingency. We added the word value in this contract because this is very much an appraisal value contingency. It's not anything on the appraisal. I'm going to back out if I'm not happy with something on the appraisal. It is strictly if it doesn't approve for the appraisal price, then you can back out. It's not if the house measures for too little or if there's something about the appraisal that comes up that I don't like. It's still appraised for the price, so you're still obligated. It doesn't give you just a arbitrary back out. So if that were to happen, if it doesn't appraise for enough, you've got 3 business days to either proceed with the consummation or negotiate something different. And so that's 3 days to have something agreed upon with the other party. So if after that 3-day period you can't come to an agreement on anything, then either party can terminate by providing written notice to each other. So if you're getting close to the end of that 3 days and they're thinking they may want to proceed, make sure you figure that out and let the other party know that you're going to proceed, because they could just terminate. Seller's mortgage payoff. For those that knew the old contracts, we went away from the initials on this paragraph because it was something that was causing problems with people that didn't have a mortgage, and et cetera. So the attorney has permission either way, whether you initial that paragraph or not. But attorneys are usually getting their own permission now, so we took the initials out of that paragraph. But that paragraph just gives the closing attorney permission to get a mortgage payoff. So if the mortgage company is ever giving problems about getting a payoff, you can show them there that they've got the right to do that. All right, so Section 3, due diligence. This is the big one. This is one of our big changes. So buyer's right to inspect. So essentially this says that the buyers have 10 business days to do any and all inspections that they want to do. There's defines what all those are, what an inspector is, etc., final walkthroughs, all those things, right? So there are 3 options, all right? The big thing to know is at the top of this paragraph, you select only one of the followings, but you must select one. So you must initial and check A, B, or C. If you don't initial or select A, B, or C, the contract defaults to option C, which is as is with no due diligence.
Oh.
So if they do more than one, it's going to default to the first one. But if they don't do any, it's going to default to option C. That's very important and a very big deal. And now I'll tell you, now that DocuSign has come out, we know that when you're doing DocuSign, there are required initials and there are optional initials, right? And so anything that gives somebody a choice is going to default into your DocuSign as an optional initial.
And they normally never check them.
All the time, people skip through those. So this is another point to say, you need to be going through your contracts with your clients. You cannot just send the contract and hope that they initial all the right spots. Right? Because, and this is crucial. Because if you send it to them just like it is without going in there and making things required or not, and they skip these initials, they're buying it as is, where it is, with no due diligence. So it's a big deal. So the way to fix that is when you go into DocuSign and they show up as optional initials, just go in there and delete the two that the person isn't going to do and make the one that is, make it required. Because if you leave it like it is, it'll never fail. They'll miss them, and you'll have an as is with no due diligence contract on your hands because they'll miss the optional signature. All right. So what this does is it gives you the first option is typical to what most people know, and that is it gives you 10 business days to do any and all inspections you want to do, non-destructive inspections, termite inspection, heating and air inspection, pool inspections, whatever you want to do. And you've got 3 options at the end of that. Your buyers can either take it, they can leave it, or they can ask them to fix stuff. So this first option is they're just going to take it. Like, hey, we've done our inspections, everything's good. We're letting you know within our 10 days that we're just going to move forward. Option 2 is, holy cow, there's way too many things wrong. My buyers are freaked out. They're just going to walk away. We're terminating. Both of those are relatively rare. It almost always happens in the third case that they're going to request remedy. And that remedy, this is another difference in the old contract, is request remedy. Because requesting a remedy could be requesting them to make repairs, it could be requesting a reduction in price, it could be a number of things. Those were not options on the previous contract, they're options on this contract. So, let's see, so if you choose this option and you don't get back to people, if buyer fails to submit complete copies of these reports and the addendum to the seller or seller's broker prior to the expiration of the due diligence period, buyer will be deemed to have accepted the property as is, with seller having no obligation to make any repairs or replacements, and buyer will be obligated to proceed. So again, it is vital that if you're coming to the end of that 10 days and you don't have an agreement, you need to have a termination sent over or a termination prepared and an extension sent over. And if you do not get that extension signed in time, you have got to send that termination, because otherwise your people are buying it as is. Does that make sense?
Can I ask, under 13 where it says buyer's right to inspect, where it says buyer, comma, or inspector selected by buyer?
Where are you at here?
13.
Buyer or inspector selected by buyer, yep.
So that's saying buyer can inspect the house themselves.
That's not a change.
However, where does it say in here the buyers have to be licensed? Because it says the term inspector is defined, but buyer's not defined.
I mean, so you're gonna tell me I can't inspect my own house?
But you're not gonna write me an addendum as a seller's agent and tell me to fix crap because you're not licensed to know if it's good or not.
I could. I'm buying the house. I want you to fix these things.
Wow, okay. I'm glad we don't explain it that way.
Do you remember that, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, it's like whether they're licensed or not, a buyer has a right to look at a house and say, well, that's broken. I want them to fix that. Like, I don't need an inspector to tell me that's broken. It's broken. I want them to fix it.
Yeah,
So,
those visual items when you're showing the house would go on the contract because you visually saw
Hopefully,
those
right.
before you made the offer.
hopefully. Yeah, I mean, I've had buyers before that are investors that
Yeah.
they'll go crawl the house
That's a little
themselves and they'll
different,
go do,
Completely
they'll
different.
do the stuff. We're not gonna tell them that, like, okay, I bought 1,000 houses, I can go crawl in your house and know if it's good or not. I don't wanna pay a inspector $500, I'll just go crawl the house myself. Like, we're not gonna tell them that, no, you have to have a licensed person go inspect it. You can't ask for things. Well, I'm buying the house, I can ask for what I wanna ask for, right?
It doesn't have to be done, but you can still.
Right,
ask
yeah,
for it.
I can still ask for it. The seller can say, go fly a kite, those aren't valid. But as a buyer of the house, I'm entitled to ask for what I want to ask for, regardless of whether I have an inspector or not.
Yeah, because when you send that addendum, you're sending all copies of all inspections.
Right.
And the
If-
buyer
if-
wouldn't
if
have
any.
an inspection.
Yep,
You
right.
would just have his, okay.
Correct, yep.
Sorry to add to the
Nope.
madness.
You're good.
That's a good
But
question.
anyhow,
Yep, you're good. Yeah, I mean, it's,
I'm the seller side.
I mean, yeah,
I
that's,
mean,
so,
the
so,
CEO of
yeah.
Wells
It's
Fargo is not gonna come up with a, I mean, you
just-
know.
Right, yeah, it's the seller's option whether they're okay with it
Yeah.
or not. They can just say, I'm not doing them, like, have an inspector do it and I'll think about it, or what, I mean, it's, Negotiations are negotiations, right?
Yeah.
All right,
I've never
so.
seen that listed like that, so
So, terminate or request remedy, we went through that, right? So you have 10 business days to get your stuff over, and then you've got 5 business day negotiation period after that. So the thing about this 5 business day negotiation period is that is a negotiation period. That isn't 5 days to respond as a seller, that's 5 days to negotiate.
Wrap it up.
That 5 days starts at the expiration of the due diligence period.
Even if you sent that before.
It does not start, if you send the addendum over 5 days into the due diligence period, and that doesn't mean that you've got 5 business days from then. That just means you send it early, and that's great, but the due diligence period can still end, and then the negotiation period starts. So really that might mean you got 10 business days to negotiate, because you got 5 left of the due diligence and 5 of the negotiation. But you also need to know that there's nothing that says that they're only allowed to send 1 addendum. So if you send an addendum on the 3rd business day, and they decide they want to send another one on the 7th business day, there's nothing that says they can't do that. So if you send, so let's say we're buying a house, I send you an addendum on the second business day of our deal. Like, we have inspected, we're good. I send you an inspection, we're good. Your people say, okay, cool, we're good with that. And then on the 8th day, I send you another one that says, oh, and here's some more things we want you to fix.
Oh,
That's technically not against contract.
that's right.
So when you're accepting a repair addendum, one thing you can do is you can write, this hereby ends the due diligence period.
Yep.
Right? And then the 5 business days start then. If you don't write that, the due diligence period is still open, and
So
the negotiations are still open to happen.
You are.
Right? It's rare that happens, but it's happened.
We just got burned on that recently.
Where it's like, hey, thanks for agreeing to that, but we're still within our due diligence, and we're still gonna ask for
We were
things.
expecting their 5 days to be done, and they were supposed to be sending the property.
Yep.
I mean, the answer,
Yep.
and they're like, nope, our days didn't start till yesterday or whatever.
Yep. Go ahead, Richard, what were you
I
asking?
was just gonna remind, my question,
Eric, hold on a second.
something that I found interesting, because like in Florida, it's just, the inspection period is left blank. It's an inspection period and a negotiation period at the same time.
Yep.
So like, I mean, and it would be blank. Why is like 10 days and 5 days?
It just is, but I mean, all of these are, it's an offer, and it's a contract, so I mean, you can cross through those and write different days if you want to.
I'm just curious why that's already like.
Just because I think it's been like that for a while, and I don't remember, it was probably 2016 version when we decided to make, I think it's been like that forever, but I think the thought behind it is that we want to have a defined way that it would, and most things on the contract are, we want to have a kind of a standard way that things are operated within our market. Like a standard operating procedure, where we didn't want people to be able to go in there and say, hey, we're going to do 2 days. Like, okay, we're going to do 3 days, and then it just gets out of whack, and you're like, well, how long is okay? So I've got 4 under contract. This one had a 2-day, that one had a 4-day, this one had a 7-day, and so we just wanted to kind of make it standard, I think.
I mean, just the way that the contract is written. I mean, you're pretty much in an inspection period and negotiation period almost the entire like length of until closing.
Yep. So if you don't want that, and the sellers don't want that, those can all be crossed out and negotiated.
Okay.
And that was happening for sure in this market we just came out of.
Yeah.
For sure.
I mean, we were doing 30-day and earlier closes.
Yep.
And that's just a long time.
For sure. Yep.
For a buyer to be able to back out.
Yep. All right. So I wanted to also highlight something up here in termination. So the second sentence in termination. In order to terminate, if any inspections have been performed, buyer must provide entire copies of all inspection reports and written notice of termination to seller or seller's broker prior to the expiration of due diligence period. Right? So, and then the earnest money will be released. So essentially what that's saying is, in order for a termination to be valid, if inspections were performed, you must provide entire copies of those inspections along with the termination.
You must. So it's not up to the seller. It's not up to the buyer anymore.
And that's how the previous contract was also.
Really?
But it wasn't worded as clearly.
Right.
And so we changed the wording a little bit to make sure that there's no question now that that's what it is. Because in order to terminate, if inspections were done, there's nothing that says inspections have to be done to terminate during due diligence. If the buyer looks at the house themselves and says, hey, this, and this, I want to buy it, they have kind of free will to decide they don't want to buy it. But if they do that because of inspections that were performed, they're required to send those inspection reports.
I like that.
And we also have to know then, and when we're working with sellers, if we've been provided an inspection report that has a bunch of issues, we sure as heck better be disclosing that.
Can I ask for one clarification,
Yep.
please? So you said that if the buyer decides to stay, on their day 5, this is the repair addendum, this now ends due diligence. Does that mean the next business day, that starts the 5 days for the seller, or we still have to carry through the full 10 days?
No,
plus?
if you say this hereby ends the due diligence period, then the due diligence period's over. Both parties have agreed it's ended. So the 5 days start after
This
that.
here by ends,
Mhm.
so you said?
Yep.
By, B-Y, ends.
Like this
Due
agreement,
diligence period.
yeah, this agreement hereby ends the due diligence period, and that's it.
You can also say, this ends the initial due diligence, but we will still allow 5 days to discuss it, and that shortens the time up front, but both sides have to agree.
Yeah, I mean, you can define it further, like this hereby ends the due diligence period, negotiation period starts at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning.
Right, 5 days, yeah.
All right, so I think we've gotten through that. All right, so at the end of the negotiation time frame, if there hasn't been an agreement reached by the end of that 5-day negotiation period, buyer and seller may mutually agree to extend the negotiation period through a written addendum. And the buyer will have 2 business days after the end of the negotiation period or any extension to accept it, and as is state. Or if the negotiation period isn't extended and buyer doesn't provide written notice to accept it as is, then either party can terminate. Does that make sense? All right, so FHA appraisal inspections, FHA VA appraisal inspections, this is where it just talks about that the FHA and VA appraisals they have a minimum standard that are required for those type of loans, and so the appraisal may come in after due diligence, but this allows that can happen. So it may be inspected by an appraiser, and it's not subject to the time limitations or other requirements of the due diligence period. And that's the same as the contract had been before. So you got to just prepare your seller that, hey, they're doing an FHA loan, we've agreed on these repairs, but you never know, the appraiser might come out, there might be some more fiddly stuff that they want you to do. Just know that, like, even though we've agreed on this and we're through due diligence, we're not positive we're done yet until we get that appraisal back. All right, so the second option B, property sold as is with right to terminate. And so this is the former as is with due diligence, and then the next one is as is with no due diligence. We changed those names again, like we said. So property sold as is with right to terminate just essentially says that you're going to buy it as is, but you've got your 10-day due diligence period. And so that first paragraph, or the first option is you can take it, you can leave it, or you can walk away. I'm sorry, you can take it, leave it, or you can ask them to remedy, right? So 3 options: take it, leave it, ask them to remedy. On paragraph B, that third option goes away. So you can either take it or you can leave it, but you can't ask them to remedy. I wanted to point out, I missed one of the changes up here, I'm sorry guys. So requesting remedy, so it says that on the first line there, it says buyer may request that seller make repairs and/or replacements to the property and/or provide concessions. That and/or provide concessions is new on this contract. So that allows you to ask for a reduction in price, or it allows you to ask for something else as a concession instead of them making repairs. We didn't have that in the old contract, and I forgot to point that out, so I'm sorry. All right, we'll go back to paragraph B and C here. So paragraph B says that they're going to buy it as is, so they're not going to be asking for any remedies or price reductions or anything like that. They're going to just decide whether they want to move forward or whether they don't want to move forward. Paragraph C is very risky. I wouldn't recommend doing it ever. But it basically just says we're not going to do due diligence and we're just going to move forward no matter what. We're buying it as is, and we don't have any right at all to terminate based on condition of property or inspections or anything like that. So that is very risky, and it's also, like we talked about a second ago, it's also the default if you don't check first couple. So make sure that those first couple are checked or initialed. Make sure they're required things on DocuSign and not optional. All right, so condition of property. So this just again says that the seller has to maintain the property in the condition it was at time of contract, including the lawn and shrubbery and things. They can't just let their grass get to be 12 feet long. You know, all of those things. It also, again, this is the second time the contract we mention it, but the last sentence is added there. It says seller agrees that on providing possession of property to buyer, property will be free of debris and in clean condition. So just wanted to highlight that again. But it also says that they're not putting a carpet over a hole in the floor, not saying anything, etc. But they've got to maintain it. And you'll also notice this paragraph used to say except for cases of as is, but that does not say it anymore, because you still, even if a house is being bought as is, you still need to maintain the property. Like you still, like where I'm buying it like it is right now, not like it's going to be a month from now and you haven't mowed the lawn and a tree's falling on it. Like I'm buying it in the condition it's in now. So that was not correct in the last contract that we had, so that has been revised. All right, so then disclosures.
Where was that, Matt? I'm sorry.
That was the beginning of paragraph 14 where it said condition of property.
Yeah.
The old contract used to say that except for the cases of as is,
yeah,
all of this applies. So in the case of as is, it didn't apply, and we removed that because the seller has an obligation to maintain the property regardless of whether it's as is or not. Because they can't just, it got broken into, windows got knocked out, and you know the grass has been growing, and the water pipes burst, and sorry, that's not how it's intended.
Lori said one time, and I thought it captured it so beautifully. She said, when they make an offer, the offer they came up with was based on the value that they perceive for everything that's there
right now
and how it's there.
Right.
So 30 days later, it needs to be the same, or essentially they're paying more.
Yep, and they want to. Yep. All right, so disclosures. We move on to disclosures and get into legal stuff. So property condition disclosure statement, we hopefully all know that needs to be done, except for in rare scenarios. So most of the time you're going to be initialing that paragraph A where it's been done and it's been seen. And if for some reason both sides are agreeing that it doesn't need to be done, you can initial paragraph B there. Just know that there are a lot of people saying that they have an exception to that rule. Most of the time they're not correct. Just if you're an investor, that doesn't exempt you. If you are,
I didn't live there.
if you've never lived there, that doesn't exempt you. You can just say I'm not providing one, and if the buyer agrees to it, okay, but you're not legally exempted because of those things. If you're a builder, you're exempt. If it's a foreclosure owned by the bank, if it's a foreclosure that somebody bought and is just trying to resell, they own it now. It's not owned by the bank anymore. So if it's a foreclosure owned by the bank, if it's an estate sale, if it's a builder, those have exemptions where property disclosures legally don't have to be done, whether the parties agree or not. But most of the time when you hear somebody says they're exempt, they're an investor, they don't have to do one. No, you do.
Is there some place that
When they bought it, they inspected it.
You would
So
think.
they've got some kind of knowledge
They
of what
own
now
it.
they're trying to sell to you.
They've got to have some kind of knowledge, even if it's what I say to people about an inspection. If you ever have a client who says, I don't want to fill out a disclosure form, what I tell people all the time is that is what protects you by saying, here's everything I know. It's not asking you to guarantee there's nothing wrong. It's not asking you to give warranty that there's no issues. It's just asking if you know them or not. You either check yes or no. You don't check no representation. If yes means yes, I know there's issues. No means I don't know of any issues. No representation really just means I'm shady, I'm not going to tell you. And so yes and no, it's either a yes or no answer.
Yes or no.
Yeah, you either know something
or you don't.
or you don't. So if you know something, you check yes. If you don't know something, you check no, and you have just covered yourself from all liability. The only way you're going to be liable for something is if you say, no, I don't know of anything, and it turns out you did.
You did.
You know, like if you just had a roof estimate done and the roofer said, yeah, this thing's shot, it needs to be replaced immediately, there's leaks everywhere, and you check, nope, don't know of any roof problems, and the buyer buys the house and calls a roofer because they move in and the roof is leaking, the roofer was like, I was just out here 3 weeks ago, I told the guy it needed to be replaced, here's the estimate, then you're probably in trouble. But that's very rare. A lot of investors don't have a whole lot of knowledge, and it's like, okay, great. It's just asking you what you know. So if you don't know of anything, just check you don't know. that conversation I've had a lot over the years with people, that they just feel like, oh no, I'm creating liability on myself. Well, no, you're not.
I'm scared of
I mean, if you're lying, you are. If you're not lying, then you're not creating
You don't know,
liability.
you don't know. Yeah, he even says to the best of your
To
knowledge.
the best of your knowledge, do you know or not? Yep. All right, so lead-based paint. So we know that has to be done on any property built prior to 1978, and that must be done prior to contract. We talked about this a lot, but it must be done prior to contract. So if it is not done prior to contract, you're outside of federal guidelines. So that's one of Lori's pet peeves, is when we see a contract that comes through that's dated, January 11th, and we see a lead-based paint disclosure dated January 17th. If we ever get audited, we're in trouble. And those fines are a lot. So make sure that is done. It's fine if it's done at the same time as contract, if it's all sent over in one email and stuff, but don't go under contract and then a week later say, oh, hey, you forgot the property, or forgot the lead-based paint. Here's the lead-based paint. Please don't do that. Please know to do that as you're going through the contract. All right, property documentation. So this is where, again, this is another thing to point out here. If you look at the bold next to the title of paragraph 17, buyer to complete information in paragraph A through E and seller to confirm. Because again, we talked about you want to send over a complete contract that the other side, if they're in agreement, they can just sign off and you're under contract. You don't want to give them a bunch of things that they can fill out and get out of the contract because something isn't filled out properly or correct. And also, you want to make sure that you're sending it over. This is essentially, this paragraph especially, because it's talking about sewer and water and things that we're verifying. The buyer is making an offer under the assumption that these things are true, right? So the buyer is saying, okay, it's on public sewer and public water. It's not in the flood zone. There's no association fees. There's no special assessments. They send the offer over, and the seller figures out, no, it's on a septic tank in a well. It's not on public water and sewer. They're going to have to cross through and check those things. And that's going to have to be noted by the buyer and agreed upon because they made an offer thinking something different, right? Where if you were to send this over blank, that seller is going to check what's valid and sign it, and you're under contract. Because you sent over a blank contract that allowed the seller to fill in whatever he wanted to. And there's no way to go back and figure out that, no, that was a change. No, that was a change. Well, there's no initials, there's no strike throughs. So you've got to send over a filled out contract. So this is also where it talks about having a survey done, recommendations to the buyer, having a survey done, having title search done, making sure that you are verifying square footage. These are all things that you should be talking about with your clients to make sure that if these are important to you, make sure you have these done independently. You can have them done during due diligence if you want, but if these are important, make sure that they're done. So it either is or is not subject to approval of a third party. Who's had a third party approval one recently? I've heard of a short sale a long time, but I think they're coming. And so, the market we're going into, we're probably going to see more relo and more corporate owned and more short sales. So that is if it's subject to a third party. Okay, we're going to agree to this price, but we're not sure we can sell it unless the bank says that the foreclosure is acceptable. So that's what that would be. B is you're one or the other on each of the top lines, right? Or each line. So it's either public or community sewer, septic, let, or other, and it's either public community water, well system, or other. So one of those should be checked on each of those lines. Flood zone, it either is or is not. Again, you check that and send it over based on what you think. And if the seller thinks something different, he changes it, but you're not agreeing to something preemptively by sending over something blank. Association fees, it either is or is not subject to a mandatory association fee. You write in the fee there per year, per month, per 6 months, and it's payable to you blank. Those are important to have filled out so the buyer knows. And it either is or is not subject to a special assessment. Fill that one out. Those are things that you can find out by inquiring with the, if it's a condo or HOA, you inquire with that HOA, and they'll give you the information. All right, so moving on to paragraph 5, additional contingencies. This has changed a little bit also. So again, these have to either be checked or not checked. So we didn't do initials for these anymore, but it either is or is not. So it either is contingent or it is not contingent. A lot of times you're going to say is or is not, but you can see there, we put the form numbers in there, so it's very clear which forms go with which, so CCRA 11 or CCRA 12. So if it is attached to the contract, then you go to CCRA 11 and fill it out, or if the closing contingency is attached, you go to that and fill it out. Sale and closing is for if you have a house for sale, and it has not sold yet, but you're making an offer contingent on it selling and closing, then you would use that one. If it is a contract.
That means it's not under contract.
It's not under contract, yep.
Okay.
If it is under contract, then it's not contingent on it selling anymore, you've sold it, you're just contingent on closing. Yep, so that closing contingency is what you would use in that case.
Now back up to 17. So
Yep.
we're working with a buyer, and we're filling out this contract.
Bless you.
When they sign that, they're stating that they've seen everything we can provide, tax records, plot plan, verification of square footage, covenants and restrictions. If that house has covenants and restrictions applied to it, they need to have them in their possession, because when they sign there, they're saying they've seen all that.
What the paragraph says is that we recommend that they review existing property documentation prior to closing. So we recommend that you review the plat, the covenants and restrictions, property disclosure before entering into the contract. And then we also recommend that prior to closing, that they review the survey and other things. So there are some things we recommend that they do prior to contract. So plat, covenants, restrictions, property disclosure prior to entering contract. And then survey other things if they want to verify square footage, title examination, all those things. Insurance stuff like flood insurance, earthquake insurance, stuff like that. All that prior to closing. So there's a most current plat that they hopefully would be able to review that you as an agent would provide for them. But they could also have a new plat done or a new survey done. It would be before closing. Obviously, they're not going to have a new survey done before contract. But yeah, it just says we recommend. It doesn't say that they're signing off saying they have. It just says we recommend that you do that. All right, so additional contingencies, we did that. So other contingencies, if there's some other contingency, then that would be where you write that in there. So 20C is where you write that in. And that could be, people ask what those could be a lot. So that could be anything like a contingent on me getting my job that I'm applying for, contingent on my kid getting into school here, we're buying the house for my kid to live in, we don't know that they've been accepted yet, things like that.
Would that also be, like if the HOA documents are not attached, couldn't you put that the seller or the listing agent has, or will allow us 5 days for the buyer to search and find, or search and find? And
so you could, but that's also something that you have 10 days due diligence. So like you can write that in there. I wouldn't write that in there because I know that the due diligence covers it. So if you're doing a due diligence contract, that buyer has that 10 days to do whatever due diligence they want to, and if part of that due diligence is finding out those HOA documents and examining them and determining whether they're okay or not, they can back out because of that anyway. So you got that 10 days. So to me that's just extra stuff that doesn't need to be subjected to negotiation and other things. Like you've already got your 10 days. So if that's something they want to do, then they can do that during that 10 days.
Okay, so I got a quick question. While we got like two hot rock stars in here that could answer this, I've heard 1,000 million different answers to this.
That's a lot.
I know, right? I've heard over and over and over again that during the due diligence, a buyer can get out for any reason, including I changed my mind and I don't like the purple room anymore. Is that correct?
Yep.
It's correct.
We just had it.
For any reason at all. They can go, I just changed my mind and not give a reason. Okay. And that's due diligence, so we need to tell our sellers, you know.
They can walk away for anything. We weren't even 5 days in and the buyers, we got
The husband's making the
a
decision.
showing request for a walkthrough. So they had inspection scheduled for Tuesday, but the whole family wanted to walk through on Sunday, and Sunday afternoon we got to release a contract because they decided they really didn't like it.
Yep. So if you look at the termination paragraph right here, right?
Just to check.
It says, if buyer in their sole discretion, right? That's the first words.
Sole discretion.
If buyer in their sole discretion.
Where is it?
Under
it's
Under
right here.
terminate.
The termination.
That's the T word, like the M.
What line is that?
That is, so if you're looking at the due diligence procedure, so page 5,
in there, let's
Yeah,
highlight that
page,
for the
page
buyer,
5,
so we can
where it says
cover
under due diligence procedure, it says number 2, terminate. So if buyer, in their sole discretion, or as a result of any inspection, examination, or test conducted, determines the property to be unsatisfactory, buyer may terminate this contract. So, you know, if we go back to our I don't know what that is in the English language, what it is, but when you have part of an or, you can take out the other part and it should still be true, right? So if you read it another way, it would say, if buyer, in their sole discretion, determines property to be unsatisfactory, buyer may terminate this contract. So,
T word for the buyer, F word for the seller.
all right, so then we go back here to this page where we're talking about contingencies and addenda. So we do have some addenda that are out and available, and we wanted to make it so that there was an easy way to say that those were included. And so we put a separate thing in here instead of what was the old paragraph 18 where you could write in, you know, addendum attached. 21 is addenda. So addenda not otherwise identified either are or are not attached to this part of the contract of sale. So if you do like a lender selection addendum, if you do any kind of early occupancy or whatever it might be, that's going to be in there. That's where you write that in there as a number addenda, as the addenda. And now we all have form numbers. All of our documents have form numbers, so we can write in there that, you know, this, you know, CCRA form that, you know, whatever the number is attached. All right, and then paragraph 22 is other terms. And so that is where we would write anything else that needs to be written in there. You know,
What we used to put in 18.
yeah, that would be what you used to put in 18. I'm just thinking for the new agents. What are some things that you write in paragraph 22? Penny?
Utilities
Or-
will remain owned for one business
Sure.
day after closing.
All appliances to remain to include.
Yep.
And list them.
Yep.
List them, because just because MLS says refrigerator, we don't know
Right.
it's gonna be that
So,
way.
yeah.
Current
What a
term
lot of
bond,
people, a lot of people
transfer.
say that appliances and things should be on a bill of sale. Some people handle them on a contract if they're just a few. Like I wouldn't start getting into patio furniture and things like that on the contract, but if it's just, you know, the refrigerator currently in place is to convey in good condition and working order at no additional cost to the buyer and having no value in the transaction, you know, that's a standard thing to write in that paragraph.
The bill itself.
Say that again.
I said the
Refrigerator
refrigerator
in place.
that's currently in place on the property will convey in good working order, good working condition, at no additional cost to the buyer and having no value in the transaction. Saying that means when you add all those, having no value and all those things are appraisal. There's reasons because appraisers can, if you include it, appraisers can subtract that from the value of the house because you got a $3,000 fridge that you're including that's not part of the house. So you're selling it for $160, so really it's appraising for $157 or whatever. That's
In
how.
good
That's how
working condition, not part of the transaction and
Yeah.
no cost to buyer.
At no cost to buyer and having no value in the transaction. Some people will go as far as to put the serial number, like
It's
the
smart to do.
refrigerator, you know, the Whirlpool refrigerator serial number, blah blah blah, is included in the transaction in working order at no additional cost to the buyer, having no value in the transaction.
And it's not part of this transaction.
Well, it is part of the transaction. It has no value in the transaction. Is what we say. So it's included in the sale, having no cost to the buyer, having no value in the transaction. Other legal terms. So these are kind of the legal mumbo jumbo at the end. So fire or casualty. If something happens, act of God, whatever, house burns down, tree falls on it, the seller needs to notify the buyer immediately, and the buyer has 10 business days after the notice to decide whether they're going to terminate or give the buyer an opportunity or the seller, an opportunity to fix it or whatever. Default, so if buyer or seller fails to perform, either may elect to seek remedy, and that is keeping earnest money or suing each other. However, the parties agree that prior to suing each other, they're going to go to mediation, which is what paragraph 25 defines. 26, this is the entire binding contract. We've talked about that a little bit, that, you know, even if the agents are talking back and forth and oh, hey, we're gonna get this due diligence worked out, don't worry about it, it's gonna be fine, and you get past your time, well, the contract says they're buying it as is, so it doesn't matter what the agents have chatted about with each other, you gotta go by what the contract says. So make sure that you're following the contract regardless of, you wanna be nice and professional with the other agents, but we have to protect our clients. So, if another agent isn't doing something in a timely manner, and that's gonna cause your client to be obligated to something, you gotta do what you have to do, and like, hey, we sent you over termination because I haven't heard back from you, and I didn't want my buyers to be obligated, so you got a termination in your email. If you wanna work it out, like, we'll work it out, but we had to send a termination, otherwise we were obligated. So, all right, non-resident tax, this is a big one, that if people are moving out of state, there is a 7% withholding tax based on their net at closing, not based on the sales price, but based on what they're netting. So if they have no mortgage, they sell a house for $300,000, they're gonna withhold $21,000 from that sale if they're moving out of state. Until they file their taxes, they can get it back when they file their taxes. If they are selling a $300,000 house and they have a 290 mortgage and they get $10,000 at the sale, they're only withholding $700. It's the same price, but they're holding 7% of the proceeds of the sale.
7% of the sales.
Yep. Time is of the essence, so we have to move forward diligently. We can't drag our feet on purpose. Like we were just talking about a second ago, if somebody's not responding, that's not okay, but it doesn't relieve us of our obligations to follow the contract. Survival, if anything is meant to survive the contract, it does. Otherwise, everything terminates at closing. Settlement statement release, and this is where it gives the attorney the permission to furnish the buyer and the seller's brokers copies of the settlement statement. That's how we get our copies for our files. 31, this used to just say Megan's Law, but we are now talking about sex offenders and criminal information. We didn't want to limit it to just sex offenders like the old contract did. So this just says that we are not responsible for obtaining criminal or sex offender information for the buyers, but we recommend that they seek that out themselves, and we can't tell them that because we don't know for a fact that the information is correct, but we can tell them where to go to find information, and if they base any decisions on that information, it's non-discrimination because it's information they found and made a decision on, not the information we gave them.
Because you don't want to be liable for any discrimination.
Yeah, you don't want to tell somebody that, hey, there's a sex offender that lives next to that house based on this thing I found.
No.
And they don't buy that house, and you find out later that sex offender moved 2 years ago, and now that seller is suing you because you affected the sale of their house by giving not accurate information. So you let the buyers figure that out themselves. All right, and then paragraph number 32, non-reliance clause. These are very similar to the old contract. This just says that the way I summarize this for my clients is this just says that you're not relying on anything I've told you. I'm not twisting your arm behind your back and making you buy this house, and you're buying it of your own decisions. I'm just a real estate agent. I'm not a tax advisor or attorney or any of those other things. If you feel like you want to talk to any of them, talk to them. I am not them. And the 33 disclaimer says that we are not giving any warranty. I don't know anything about the house. I think it looks pretty good. I'm just advising you on my thoughts. I'm advising and counseling you on value and saleability. It could fall over tomorrow for all I know. I don't know. Don't come back and sue me if it falls over tomorrow. You have other experts that are doing all those inspections and things that you can rely on, but I'm not making any
new verbiage because I don't remember that.
Nope. Well, what I just said is not exactly what it says in there. It doesn't say like if your house falls over tomorrow.
No. Yeah, I got that. I just don't remember the wording of the seller's broker gives no warranty.
Nope. Those are verbatim from the other contract. The only thing that changed in there was where it says reading and understanding the South Carolina disclosure of real estate brokerage relationships. When we made this contract before, that used to be the brochure, and so it used to say a different name right there. We changed it to go in line with what that document's actually called now.
Yeah, I wrote an offer the other night, and I read it, and I'm like, what in the world? Whenever did we get warranties?
We don't.
No.
Yep. That's the same paragraph. All right, so then you get into the signatures, right? So again, buyer's signature, seller's signature. So we're, as a buyer's agent, we're having them initial all the places they need to initial. They're going through and signing and dating, printing their name. And this is another thing, again, we should be sending over completed contracts. And so this is something that a lot of buyer's agents just fill out their part, send it over, and expect the seller's agent to fill out whatever theirs is.
That is like my biggest,
This is all information that we can look up and put on the contract. Most of it's in the
it's
MLS.
so lazy. If you
So-
just can't.
Buyer's agent name, your company, your license number, our office code, your email address, and your phone number.
MLS?
Yeah, buyer's agent.
Seller's,
license number,
seller's name, when you go
It's
to,
on the listing at the bottom of the page.
Go to
Yeah.
LLR.
Yeah.
when you go to a listing, it says the seller's agent's name in there, it says in the company, and it says their agent license number,
Huh.
right there in the MLS at the bottom. It doesn't say the LLR office code.
Yeah.
So you've got it, you can look there and you can click it. And I think if you click their license number, I think it actually takes you to the LLR now.
I'll check.
So, but if it doesn't, it's really simple. You go to the LLR licensee lookup, just Google LLR licensee lookup, and go to Real Estate Commission, and you can look them up by their name. What that also will tell you is how many agents are out there doing business as the wrong person. Penthea, I'm just kidding. You got yours right.
You said you
But
look on
it
what?
tells you when you go to the listing, it should, when you go down to their license number, you should.
It's not clickable.
Okay. So you just Google LLR licensee lookup, and it will take you to the licensee lookup page, which is all of the like nurses and everybody who's licensed within the state of South Carolina. So you got to go to Real Estate Commission and then type in their name. But it never fails that you type in somebody's name and they don't come up because they're operating by their middle name or their nickname or whatever. So if that is any of you, just a little soapbox here, if that's any of you that operate by a name that isn't your legal given first name, there's a way to go in and file for a nickname on the LLR's website. So file for a nickname. I've had to do that. My first name's Richard. My middle name's Matthew. That's what I go by. So, you gotta go in there and do it. We've got other people in the room who are also doing that. They go by a nickname. And so that's what it is. So, yep, that's me.
The
more you know, right? So my dad actually goes by Dick. Yep. My dad goes by Dick, and I go by my middle name. All of our generations are Richard something Carroll. I'm like the 13th or something, and every other generation goes by the middle name. So, except for I kicked the trend, and my son goes by Lincoln. He's Richard Lincoln, but he goes by Lincoln. So we're two middle names in a row. So I bucked the generations long trend, but is what it is. So then the very last part of this is where you write in your ratification, right? So we added some language here. This section is not to be completed until the conditions of paragraph 2B are fulfilled. Completion is for informational purposes to mark the beginning of contract deadlines and timelines. Failure to complete this section does not change the validity of this contract, right? So we would write in, when we receive it, the last party to receive the contract with no more changes fills this out of when you received it, and you send it back to the other side. And that is the end of the contract. Everything is done. You've sent it back to them. The deadlines are defined, and we're moving forward.
Great job, Matt.
All right.
So I have a question.
Yep.
When we get these as a listing company and all this seller's agent, all that, buyer's agents are so lazy they don't fill it out. Do you send it back to them and say, please provide us a completed contract? Or do you complete it when you send it back and say, hey, Susie John, we were very courteous and we completed this contract for you?
Like
Because
a
you
nice
suck.
nasty.
It depends on what mood I'm in, usually.
Okay.
I just tell her to call buyer's
If I'm being very, okay, so the Keller Williams answer
I
is
know you do.
we treat people how we want to be treated,
That's right.
right? And we
We're kind.
help people, and we are gonna, they may be they probably don't have this contract class at their office, and so they may not know any better. So, hey, technically this is supposed to be completed by you, but we're countering anyway. So, if you're gonna just accept the offer, I'd probably say, hey, can you fill this out? We're gonna accept your offer, but we need you to fill it out completely so I can just accept it. If we're countering anyway, we're making changes anyway, so I'm just gonna write the stuff in there, send the counter offer back and say, hey, we countered, just so you know for future reference,
We did your job.
that bottom part, you're supposed to fill that out, even though it's got my
Just
information.
an FYI.
And in fact, let me tell you how
Send
to
it to me. It's
Right.
amazing you didn't know my email address.
exactly. But in fact, let me show you how to do it, right? That bottom part's supposed to be filled out. It's got my information, but we can't just sign this contract to accept it if you're going to accept it. So you've sent over an offer that can't be accepted. So here's how you do it. Go over and here's how you, all this in the MLS, go to LR, fill it out, and then there you go. Then you can send a complete offer. So
It is
that's
a
what
little
it is.
frustrating though, with teams. I wrote an offer the other night, and it had,
Yep.
listing agent, co-broke, it's like you put both of them on there.
Yep, they should have
It's wrong, they'll
instructions.
fix it, but at least you sent it over completed.
Yep, yeah, they should have instructions. If they didn't have instructions, you send it over with the listing agent, that's on them for not having instructions on how to fill it out.
I've sent it over with the listing agent, and
So-
they were not happy because it was supposed to go under this agent, or it's.
Yeah, I get you.
And then you got buyers agents on teams as well.
Yep.
Buyers are,
Right, so we are up against time here. I just wanted to go through and show you, so here's the awesome thing, right? So when you go through, and we're on DocuSign, right? So this is, I've opened a contract, I'm gonna be going through and putting in my information. Let's say, this is entered into, let's say we're entering into it on January 12th. It's Johnny Doe, and Susie Smith. And we're gonna go down, we fill everything out, we have the contract completed, right? Like normally you go through here and complete everything, right? And then we save it. And then we go to envelopes up here, right? We're gonna, shit. I'm sorry, I'm backwards here.
the envelope is different now.
Yeah, so I click here and I go to envelopes, right? I'm gonna create an envelope. And I'm gonna go buyer one, I'm sending this off to buyer one for them to sign it, right? So I hit continue. And that's gonna pull it from rooms into e-signature, right? So the awesome thing about how DocuSign works now is it used to be at this point, when it comes into e-signature, it would be a flat PDF. There's nothing you can change. If you misspelled the seller's name or whatever, can't do anything about it. Well, now you can. It's all a live document still. So you can come over here and say, what is going on with my computer here?
So like the price, when it's 0, because you didn't change it in details, you can go in there and change it there.
Yep.
Nice.
Yeah, so it's harkening back a little bit to similar to like a document.
Yeah.
All right, so documents are here, right? I'm gonna scroll down here. I can put John Doe on here, put his email in. Let's just say testing@gmail. And you know that you can set signing order in DocuSign too. That's a conversation for another day. But if you wanted to set signing order and send it to your clients to sign, and then put the other agent as the next person, you can. And you can actually have different messages. If you want, you can go here and say custom email. Oh, nope, not that. It doesn't do it because I don't have 2 people. But if you have more than one person on the email, you can actually write a separate message to each of them, and they'll get it when they get the copy. But either way, that's a DocuSign class for another day. So if I go over here and go to next, that's going to spit me over to where I'm doing my initials and things, right? So we can see, like, we're going to click here. This one's got to be required. I want them to initial that for sure. But you can see John Doe and Susie Smith are right here. So if I want to change it, oh, I'm sorry, Susie, I forgot you were married now. Your last name is actually Davis now. So I can change that right there while we're already in here adding initials and signatures.
Did you see that?
If I need to change the price, I had 500,000 in there as the price. When it came over, and I'm like, oh, never mind. I send it over to the buyers, and they're like, you know what, we've been thinking, we actually want to go lower. We want to go to 490. We can change it in right here before we send it off to a signature. It's not stuck there as a flat PDF like it used to be.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh yeah, by the way, can I go in there and fix all of these dates and signatures? Because that's what takes me the most time is the dates like so far up, and it's
So the reason for that is if you had a second person, their date's right here. So it's formatted where they're in a certain spot. So if you have 2 signers or 3 signers or 4 signers, those are all a certain spot.
Okay.
So I want to just go down here and show you, anytime that there is like this, anytime that there is an option for them to check one or the other, you've got to go in here and say, I'm going to delete these. You can highlight them both and delete them. And you go up here and say this is required. And that's going to make them sign. It won't let them complete the document without signing. what I was talking about earlier, where that is crucial, absolutely crucial,
Due diligence.
is down here on due diligence, right? Because you have got to check one or the other of these, otherwise it's an as-is contract. So if we're gonna do due diligence, I'm gonna make that a required field for sure, right?
So we have
So
to make
before
sure.
it was already required, so now we have to check it?
When there's multiple options, they're not all
Yeah, when there's
required.
multiple options, they've always been optional,
Okay.
Yeah,
because you have multiple options. So
Gotcha.
before, it was just default, like there was no initial by due diligence, you just initialed if you wanted as-is. And so the as-is ones were optional, but it was automatically due diligence, there was no
Gotcha.
initial by due diligence.
prime example, like on your ERB, how all of those,
Yeah, or like
Find the
property,
one
or like
time
a
showing
property
compensation
disclosure.
agreement, where do we
Okay.
find that?
DocuSign, should be the SCR library, compensation agreement. All right,
Good job, man.
everybody got that?
You're
See what it's all about?
Yeah.
All right,
we're doing great.
Thank you.
very good. Well, thank you all for being here.